Under the frost-laced moon of Greywatch, where shadows clawed at the citadel's spires like forgotten oaths, Elowen Bryn felt the weight of her own breath turn to ice in her lungs. The wind howled through the stone battlements, carrying the metallic tang of impending blood, and the low murmurs of the pack gathered below. Greywatch Citadel loomed eternal against the jagged peaks, its walls forged from the bones of ancient glaciers, now slick with the first snows of a merciless winter. Torches sputtered in iron sconces, their flames dancing like captive spirits, casting elongated shadows that twisted across the execution platform. The air was thick with the scent of pine resin and fear sweat, a prelude to the violence that had simmered in the pack's veins for moons. Elowen stood at the edge of the throng, her woolen cloak pulled tight against the bite of the northerly gale. At 30, she was no stranger to the margins. A low-ranked Omega, her days spent in the quiet discipline of the herbalist's quarters, tending wounds that others inflicted without remorse. Her hands, calloused from grinding roots under lantern light, bore the faint scars of thorns long since withered. She had learned early that survival in the pack meant blending into the frost-kissed stones, unseen and unremarked. Rejections had carved her like river ice, a mate who claimed her only to discard her for a higher-born she-wolf, elders who dismissed her counsel as the whisper of wind. Yet she endured, her spirit a hidden flame beneath the snow, fueled by an unyielding sense of what was right even when it drew blood. Tonight, that flame flickered perilously close to extinction. The council's decree had echoed through the great hall at dusk. Alpha King Cale Morwyn, sovereign of the Greywatch realm, stood accused of treason. Whispers of betrayal laced the air. Alliances forged in secret with rival packs. A crown bartered for peace at the cost of pride. The elders, their furs streaked with silver and eyes hardened by decades of war, had voted in shadowed chambers. Now, under the watchful gaze of the Luna goddess's pale orb, justice would be swift, the blade an extension of the pack's unyielding law. Cale knelt at the platform's center, his broad frame unbowed despite the chains that bit into his wrists. At 48, he was a monument to the wilds, raven hair streaked with frost, eyes like storm-tossed seas, deep blue and fathomless. His armor, once gleaming with the embossed sigil of the crescent moon, hung dented and bloodied from battles past. Guilt shadowed his features, not for the fabricated sins they pinned upon him, but for the weight of a throne that demanded sacrifices he could no longer stomach. He had ruled with an ethical ferocity, melancholy in his solitude, bound by duty to a pack that now turned like wolves upon their own. The council's betrayal stemmed from his refusal to unleash war on the border clans, a choice born of mercy that they branded weakness. As the executioner raised the steel axe, its edge catching the moonlight in a cruel gleam, Cale's gaze lifted, not in defiance, but in quiet resignation. What was strength if not choosing mercy, even when it felled you? The crowd shifted, a sea of gray pelts and armored forms, their breaths clouding the air in unison. Warriors with scars like lightning across their cheeks, elders clutching talismans etched with lunar runes, all bearing witness to the fall of their king. Weavos rose faintly from the distant forests, as if the wilds themselves mourned the unraveling of order. Elowen's heart pounded, a drumbeat against her ribs, sinking with the wind's relentless dirge. She had seen Cale from afar. In council gatherings, his voice a low rumble that commanded without roar, his presence an anchor in the pack's turbulent seas. He had never noticed her, this quiet Omega who mended the fallen in silence. But in the herbalist's alcove, she had heard the truths he buried, the guilt of lost battles, the duty that chained him tighter than iron. As the axe descended, time fractured like thin ice. Elowen's body moved before her mind could protest, propelled by an instinct deeper than fear, a pull toward the truth that the pack's hierarchy blinded them to. She surged forward through the press of bodies, her boots crunching snow into submission. Gasps rippled outward as she vaulted the low barrier, her cloak tearing on a jagged post. The executioner's arm halted mid-swing, the blade hovering inches from Cale's neck, its shadow falling across her like a judgment. She dropped to her knees before him, not in the subservience of rank, but in deliberate shield. Her forehead touched the blood-flecked stone, dark hair spilling like ink over the frost. The crowd fell silent, the wind alone daring to whisper. "No," she said, her voice steady as the mountain's core, carrying the weight of unspoken convictions. "This is not justice. This is fear cloaked in law." Cale's breath caught, his chained hands twitching as if to reach for her. Their eyes met, hers hazel and fierce, with the quiet fire of one who had known exile in her own home, his burdened with the melancholy of a king who had lost faith in his crown. In that instant, beneath the moon's unyielding gaze, something stirred. Not dominance, but a fragile thread of recognition woven from shared isolation. The executioner lowered the axe, confusion etching his brow, but the elders stirred, their murmurs swelling like an approaching storm. One stepped forward, his voice a growl laced with outrage. "Omega, stand aside. Your place is not here." Elowen did not rise. The cold seeped through her knees, numbing flesh but sharpening her resolve. She had been rejected before, bantered like a faulty pelt, left to the fringes. But this act, this kneeling in defense of truth, was her exilio made manifest, a banishment from the shadows she had clung to, thrusting her into the heart of the pack's unraveling. The moon above watched impassive, its light gilding the scene in silver, as if the goddess herself pondered the cost of such defiance. Warriors exchanged glances, their grips tightening on hilts, the air thickening with the promise of chaos. Cale's voice broke the tension, low and resonant, carrying the timbre of ancient forests. "Let her speak. For once let truth kneel before us all." And in that suspended breath, as snow began to fall in earnest, blanketing the citadel in white oblivion, Elowen felt the first crack in the pack's iron hierarchy, a fracture born not of blade or blood, but of an Omega's unyielding choice. The snow fell thicker now, veiling the citadel in a shroud of white remorse, each flake a silent accusation against the frozen tableau below. Elowen's knees ached against the unyielding stone, the cold seeping into her bones like the pack's growing disdain, but she held her ground, her breath forming fragile clouds that dissolved into the night. The elders' murmurs had swelled into a cacophony of outrage, their silver-streaked forms circling the platform like shadows reclaiming their territory. The executioner's axe hung limp in his grip, its blade still humming with aborted intent, while Cale's chained form loomed behind her, a silent sentinel whose presence both shielded and burdened her. "Insolence!" The lead elder, Thorn Blackthorn, thrust forward, his voice a thunderclap amid the wind's wail. His eyes, narrowed to slits of glacial blue, fixed on Elowen with the fury of one who saw his authority unraveling. At 70 winters, Thorn was the pack's unyielding spine, his pelt scarred from wars that had forged Greywatch's borders. He had orchestrated this trial, weaving accusations of Cale's treason from threads of political ambition, all to seize the throne for his own bloodline. Now, this low Omega dared interpose herself, her act a spark in the tinder of unrest. Elowen lifted her head slowly, meeting Thorn's glare without flinching. The taste of frost lingered on her tongue, mingling with the faint copper of fear, but her voice emerged clear, laced with the quiet authority of herbs that healed when blades failed. "Treason is not in his heart, Elder. It festers in the council's shadows, where mercy is twisted into weakness." The words hung heavy, drawing gasps from the warriors encircling them. Weavos echoed from the tree line, distant and mournful, as if the forest spirits bore witness to the fracture widening beneath their feet. Cale shifted subtly, the chains rattling like a dirge, his deep blue eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that pierced the veil of snow. In that gaze, she glimpsed the melancholy king, not the crowned warrior of legends, but a man hollowed by guilt, his ethical core eroded by years of choices that saved lives at the cost of his soul. He had spared the border clans from slaughter, brokered peace with whispers instead of war cries, only to be branded a traitor by those who craved blood for glory. Now, this Omega's defiance stirred something dormant in him, a flicker of hope, fragile as the first thaw. Thorn's lip curled, exposing fangs yellowed by age and rage. You, a mere Omega, presume to judge the law? Your place is the hearth, not the blade's path. He gestured sharply, and two burly enforcers advanced, their boots crunching the fresh snow into crimson-tinged slush where Kale's earlier wounds had wept. They seized Eloan's arms, yanking her upright with bruising force. Pain lanced through her shoulders, but she bit back the cry, her hazel eyes never leaving the king's. The crowd surged, a tide of gray fur and steel, some warriors averting their gazes in unease, others snarling approval at the reassertion of order. "Release her," Kale commanded, his tone low and resonant, carrying the weight of ancient oaths. The enforcers hesitated, glancing to Thorn, who spat into the snow. "The king speaks, but the council decrees. This one's interference is banishment worthy, exile for defying the pack's will." The word exile struck Eloan like a gale, evoking memories of her own quiet rejections. The mate who had cast her aside in the herbalist's dim light, elders who had silenced her insights as Omega folly. But this was no private wound. It was public, a severing broadcast under the moon's indifferent eye. They dragged her back through the throng, the pack parting like mist before a storm. Whispers clawed at her ears. "Foolish wench, she courts the wilds," as snow whipped her face, stinging like tears unshed. Kale's gaze followed her, a tether of unspoken alliance amid the chaos, until Thorn signaled the execution to resume. The axe rose once more, but in the pandemonium, a rival alpha from the eastern fringes, long coveting Greywatch's throne, emerged from the shadows, his entourage clashing with the guards in a sudden melee of steel and snarls. Blood sprayed across the platform, hot and vital against the cold, as loyalty splintered like brittle ice. Alawan twisted free in the fray, her calloused hands slipping from the enforcer's grasp, slick with sweat and snowmelt. She stumbled into the citadel's outer yards, the wind howling triumph and terror in equal measure. The symbol of her defiance crystallized in that moment. A thin silver chain around her neck, a lunar pendant inherited from her mother, now warm against her skin as if infused with the goddess's fire. It had lain dormant, a relic of forgotten Omega lore, but tonight it pulsed faintly, a beacon in her exile. She fled toward the mountain passes, the citadel's torches blurring into distant flames as the battle's roars faded. The path wound upward, flanked by pines bowed under snow's burden, their branches clawing the sky like desperate pleas. Her lungs burned with each ragged breath, the metallic tang of blood from a split lip tainting the pine-scented air. Exile was no stranger, but this banishment cut deeper, a casting out not for weakness, but for the audacity of truth. What was freedom, if not the solitude of the rejected, wandering under a moon that revealed destinies in its silver light? Hours blurred into a haze of frost and fatigue, the wind's dirge her only companion. She collapsed against a jagged outcrop, the pendant glowing softly against her chest, its crescent shape mirroring the luna above. Distant howls pierced the night, not the pack's, but something wilder, pursued. Footsteps crunched behind her, heavy and labored, and she whirled, heart slamming like war drums. From the tree line emerged Kale, chains shattered, his form bloodied and unyielding. He had escaped the skirmish, driven by the same instinct that had bound their gazes on the platform. Wounded from the blade's near kiss and the fresh clashes, he collapsed to one knee before her, not in submission, but exhaustion. Their eyes met again, the connection instinctive, raw, a spark denied by rank and reason, born from shared fear and the curiosity of souls adrift. The snow swirled around them, veiling their forms in white as the first threads of empathy wove through the cold divide. And now, I invite you to leave a trace of your presence in the comments. Tell us where in the world you're watching from and the exact hour you hear this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel and at what moments of the night they find you. The wind clawed at the mountainside like a beast denied its kill, whipping snow into veils that blurred the line between earth and sky. Elowen pressed her back against the jagged outcrop, her pulse a frantic rhythm echoing the distant clash of steel from the citadel far below. Cale's form slumped before her, his broad chest heaving with labored breaths, blood seeping from a gash across his shoulder, where an enforcer's blade had found purchase in the melee. The air hung heavy with the scent of iron and pine sap, the cold sharpening every sense until the world narrowed to the heat of his gaze upon her, a blue so deep it mirrored the shadowed crevices of the peaks. He rose unsteadily, chains dangling in fractured links from his wrists, remnants of the council's hasty binding. "You should not have come," he murmured, voice rough as gravel under boot, laced with the melancholy that had shadowed his rule. Not accusation, but regret, as if her presence amplified the guilt already carving hollows beneath his eyes. At 48, he carried the weight of a lifetime's duties like frost on his raven-streaked hair, each strand a testament to battles won and mercies granted in secret. Elowen shook her head, the lunar pendant shifting warm against her collarbone, its silver crescent a quiet pulse against the encroaching night. "And leave truth to the blade? No, my king." The words tasted of defiance and something softer, unbidden, a curiosity that stirred despite the fear coiling in her gut. She had fled exile's sting before, but this was different, a shared flight, binding her to this broken sovereign whose ethical heart had mirrored her own silent convictions. Instinct urged her to turn away, to vanish into the wilds as Omegas often did, unseen and unclaimed. Yet here she stood, drawn by the raw vulnerability in his stance, the way his eyes searched hers, not for submission, but understanding. A low howl pierced the gale, closer now, answered by the thud of paws on snow-packed trails. Pursuers, Thorn's enforcers, or perhaps the rival Alpha's vanguard, scenting blood in the wind. Cale tensed, his hand instinctively reaching for a sword long confiscated, fingers curling empty. "They come for me, for the crown they covet." His tone held no roar of command, only the quiet sorrow of one who had chosen peace over conquest, only to invite betrayal. Elowen scanned the tree line, her herbalist's instincts surfacing like roots breaking frozen soil. The pass narrowed here, flanked by sheer cliffs veined with ice, a natural choke point where ambush could turn to refuge. "This way," she said, grasping his arm, the contact electric, his skin fever-hot beneath the chill. He did not pull away, allowing her lead as they stumbled into a cleft in the rock, a shallow cave mouth hidden by overhanging boughs heavy with snow. The pendant warmed further, as if the goddess whispered guidance through its glow, a symbol awakening in the face of peril. Inside, the cave offered meager shelter, walls of damp stone etched with ancient runes, faint outlines of lunar phases that seemed to shimmer under the filtered moonlight. Elowen guided Cale to a ledge, tearing a strip from her cloak to bind his wound. The fabric darkened with his blood, the metallic tang mingling with the earthy musk of moss and earth. "Hold still," she whispered, her fingers steady despite the tremor in her chest. Up close, his presence overwhelmed, the broad plains of his face scarred from old wars, eyes holding depths of guilt for every life his mercy had spared, every alliance forged in shadows to avert slaughter. "Why risk this?" he asked, wincing as she pressed the makeshift bandage. His voice was a low rumble, stirring the air like distant thunder. "You kneel for a traitor, flee with a fallen king. What chain binds you to such folly?" She paused, hazel eyes meeting his, the cave's dimness amplifying the intimacy. The wind outside howled its fury, but here, in this hollowed sanctum, time slowed. Not chains, but choice. I've known rejections bite, cast aside for bearing no rank, no fire they deemed worthy. But you, your mercy is no weakness. It's the truth they fear. Empathy bloomed unbidden, a fragile warmth against the cave's chill. She saw in him the mirror of her own fractures, the quiet discipline that masked deeper wounds, the ethical core that demanded more than survival. Her hand lingered on his shoulder, the heat of his skin seeping through, igniting a curiosity that bordered on ache. Denied by every instinct of self-preservation, yet undeniable, a bond forging in the crucible of shared exile. Cale's gaze softened, the melancholy easing fractionally as he covered her hand with his own, calloused and strong. "Then we stand as one against the storm." The words carried a vow, unspoken but profound, his touch a bridge over the chasm of rank and rank's illusions. The howls grew nearer, shadows flickering at the cave's mouth as torches pierced the blizzard. Enforcers burst into view, Thorn's voice barking orders amid the snarl of wolves' shifting forms. "The traitor hides here. Flush him out." Steel clashed against rock as they probed the cleft, the air thickening with the promise of blood. Elawan snatched a loose stone, her body shielding Cale's as he rose, ready to fight despite his wounds. But the pendant flared suddenly, a soft luminescence spilling from her chest, casting ethereal light that danced like fireflies on the walls. The runes glowed in response, an ancient ward igniting, a barrier of woven moonlight that repelled the intruders, sending them reeling with snarls of confusion and pain. The light faded as quickly as it came, leaving silence in its wake, broken only by the wind's retreating wail. Cale stared at her, awe etching his features. What sorcery is this? Not fear, but wonder, the first crack in his guarded heart. Elawan touched the pendant, its warmth now a steady ember. Not sorcery, a gift perhaps, from the Luna who sees beyond crowns. The bond deepened in that moment, empathy weaving into something unbreakable, trust born of protection, vulnerability shared in the face of the enemy that hunted them both. Yet doubt lingered in her eyes. Was this refuge a fleeting illusion, or the dawn of a destiny that demanded more than survival? Outside, the snow continued its relentless fall, burying tracks and truths alike, as the cave held its breath against the encroaching night. The cave's runes pulsed faintly in the aftermath, their glow ebbing like the last breath of a dying star, leaving Elawan and Cale shrouded in the dim hush of stone and shadow. The air inside hung thick with the scent of damp earth and spilled blood, the metallic edge sharpening her awareness of every ragged inhale. Her hand still rested on the pendant, its silver crescent now cooling against her skin, a talisman that had stirred something ancient within her. A gift long dormant, buried beneath layers of quiet endurance and the pack's indifferent scorn. She withdrew her touch slowly, hazel eyes widening as the implications settled like fresh snow on her soul. What had she unleashed? Not just light, but a barrier woven from moonlight itself, repelling foes as if the Luna goddess had lent her voice to the stone. Cale leaned against the ledge, his wounded shoulder bandaged but throbbing, the pain a distant echo to the wonder etching his storm-deep eyes. He watched her, not with the commanding gaze of a king assessing a subject, but with the raw curiosity of a man glimpsing fate's veiled hand. At 48, he had seen sorceries in border wars, shamanic rites under blood moons, curses that twisted flesh into nightmare, but this was different, intimate, born from an Omega's unassuming form. "That light," he said, his voice a low timbre that resonated off the walls, stirring the silence like wind through pines. "It came from you, from that chain you wear. No demand, only a quiet probing, laced with the melancholy that had always shadowed his ethical reign. The guilt of secrets kept, mercies granted in isolation." Elowen nodded, her fingers tracing the pendant's edge, feeling its subtle warmth linger like a whispered promise. The cave felt smaller now, the outside world's howls muffled to a faint dirge, as if the ward had not only protected but isolated them in this fragile interlude. She had always sensed something more in the heirloom, passed from her mother, an Omega elder silenced by the pack's hierarchies for her visions that bordered on heresy. Rejections had taught Elowen to bury such intuitions, to grind herbs in silence rather than speak of dreams that tasted of moonlight and blood. But tonight, in fleeing with this fallen king, the gift had fractured free, manifesting as a shield against the very forces that sought to end him. Fear coiled in her chest, not of the power, but of its cost. To be seen, truly seen, meant vulnerability, a step beyond the exilio she had known. "It is no chain of my making," she replied, her tone steady yet threaded with introspection, the words forming like frost on her lips. "My mother called it the Luna's Eye, a relic of the old paths for those who walk unseen. I thought it mere sentiment, a comfort in the herbalist's dim light." She met his gaze, the intimacy of the moment pressing against her like the cave's chill walls. Up close, his presence was visceral, the heat radiating from his frame, the faint scent of pine and iron clinging to his skin, the scars on his neck like maps of battles where mercy had stayed his hand. Empathy had bound them in the refuge's haste, but this revelation deepened it, stirring a curiosity that resisted her instincts to retreat. What was this pull, if not the goddess revealing threads of destiny woven through rejection and guilt? Cale shifted closer, the chain's remnants clinking softly, his hand reaching not to claim, but to gently lift the pendant from her collarbone. The contact sent a shiver through her, electric as the ward's flare, his calloused fingers brushing her skin with unintended tenderness. The silver caught the faint moonlight seeping through cracks above, casting prismatic flecks across his face, illuminating the hollows of exhaustion, the blue depths holding a king's unspoken burdens. "In the old lore," he murmured, his breath warm against the cold air, "such gifts mark the pathfinders, Omegas who guide the lost through shadowed fates. I dismiss them as tales to bolster the weak." A shadow crossed his features, guilt resurfacing like blood in fresh snow. He had ruled with duty's iron weight, ethical to a fault, sparing lives in secret pacts that his council twisted into treason. Now, this quiet woman before him, rejected and resilient, held a key he had never sought, not to power, but to redemption, a destiny where mercy crowned the fallen rather than the fierce. The pendant warmed under his touch, pulsing once more, and visions flickered at the edges of Elowen's mind, not dreams, but revelations, sharp as blade edges. She saw Greywatch's citadel aflame under a blood moon, Thorn's betrayal uncoiling like a serpent, the rival Alpha's forces massing in the eastern mists. But threaded through the carnage was a path. Her hand extended, the pendant's light weaving alliances from the fractures, guiding Cale not to war's throne, but to a union born of choice. Gasping, she pulled back, the images dissolving into the cave's gloom, leaving her heart pounding like distant war drums. I saw the storm ahead. Not just pursuit, but the pack's unraveling. Thorn's hand in it all, and beyond, a rival who hungers for your blood to claim the crown. Her voice trembled, the weight of the gift pressing down, transforming curiosity into a profound ache. This was no mere instinct. It was the Pathfinder's mantle, her hidden dom manifesting to illuminate truths the hierarchies blinded. Cale's eyes widened, recognition dawning like dawn over snow peaks. He released the pendant, but his hand lingered near hers, a bridge of shared revelation. "You are the key," he said, the words heavy with awe and sorrow, his melancholy fracturing into resolve. "Not to my throne, but to what it could be, redemption through the very mercy they scorn." The bond between them solidified, no longer resisted, but accepted in the face of destiny's call. Yet doubt shadowed her joy. To embrace this gift meant stepping fully from exilio into a light that could burn as fiercely as it guided. The wind outside renewed its howl, carrying faint weavos of the pursuing pack, a reminder that refuge was fleeting, revelation a double-edged blade. In the cave's deepening silence, as moonlight filtered stronger through the veil of snow, Elowen felt the Luna's gaze upon them both, watching, waiting for the choices that would forge or shatter their intertwined fates. The pendant rested warm against her heart, a symbol now alive with purpose, pulsing in rhythm with the blood that bound King and Omega in the night's unyielding embrace. Subscribe if you believe mercy can crown even the fallen. Comment Luna if you'd walk through the storm for someone who saw your... The moon hung low over the jagged spines of the Greywatch peaks, its silver light fracturing through the cave's narrow fissures like shards of a shattered vow. Elowen felt the pendant's pulse sink with her quickening breath, each throb a reminder of the revelations that had bound her to Kale in ways neither could deny. The visions lingered in her mind's shadowed corners, flames devouring the citadel, Thorn's serpentine betrayal, the rival Alpha's hunger manifesting as an army of steel and fangs cresting the eastern ridges. Yet these glimpses were no comfort. They were harbingers, pulling her from the refuge's fragile peace into the storm's maw. The wind outside carried the pack's howls closer now, a chorus of pursuit laced with the guttural snarls of shifting forms, as if the wilds themselves conspired to drag them back to judgment. Kale rose from the ledge, his bandaged shoulder stiff but unyielding, the remnants of his chains discarded like shed skin. His eyes, deep as glacial crevasses, met hers with a resolve tempered by the melancholy that had defined his reign. "We cannot hide forever," he said, voice low and resonant, stirring the cave's damp air like a gathering tempest. "Thorn will not rest until the crown is his or broken, and the rival, Vargan of the Iron Claws, smells weakness in the blood we've spilled." He extended a hand, not in command, but invitation, his calloused palms scarred from years of wielding mercy as a blade. The touch, when she took it, grounded her amid the rising dread, his warmth a counterpoint to the chill seeping through the stone. Elowen nodded, the pendant warming against her chest as if urging her forward. The gift had awakened fully now, not as sorcery, but as intuition sharpened to prophecy, a pathfinder's sight, revealing paths through the moral labyrinths that hierarchies obscured. She had resisted it once, burying it beneath the quiet discipline of her Omega life, but exile and revelation had stripped those defenses bare. Stepping from the cave, they emerged into the blizzard's embrace, snow lashing their faces like accusations from the goddess herself. The path descended in treacherous switchbacks, flanked by pines groaning under ice, their branches clawing the sky in silent witness. Distant torches bobbed like malevolent stars, the pack's enforcers closing the noose. The confrontation came at the frozen river's edge, where the water lay sheathed in thick ice, its surface a mirror reflecting the moon's impassive face. Thorn's forces burst from the tree line first, 20 strong, pelts dusted white, eyes gleaming with feral intent. The elder himself led them, mounted on a massive gray wolf form, his silver fur matted with frost and old blood. Flanking him were warriors Elowen recognized from the citadel, grizzled enforcers who had once saluted Kale's decrees, now twisted by ambition into Thorn's thralls. And there, emerging from the eastern mist like a specter of war, rode Vargan, tall and brutal, his armor etched with claw marks, a rival alpha whose pack had long eyed Greywatch's borders with covetous snarls. His forces numbered twice Thorn's, a tide of iron and fury, their howls merging into a dirge that shook the snow from the boughs. "Traitor king!" Thorn bellowed, his voice cracking the night like thunder over ice. He dismounted with predatory grace, fangs bared in a snarl that exposed the rot of his betrayal. "You flee like a whelp, dragging this Omega fool into your shame. The council's judgment stands. Your mercy has weakened us, bartered our pride for scraps of peace." His gaze flicked to Elowyn, contempt curling his lip. "And you, wench, your light tricks the eye, but the pack knows its place. Kneel again, and perhaps we'll spare you the wild's teeth." Cale stepped forward, positioning himself between her and the encroaching line, his stance unbowed, despite the blood staining his side anew from the exertion. The wind whipped his raven hair, carrying the scent of pine and impending violence, but his eyes held no rage, only the ethical sorrow of a king confronting the fractures he had tried to mend. "Judgment? This is greed cloaked in law, Thorn. You twisted my pacts with the borders into treason to claim what was never yours. Vargan," he turned to the rival, voice steady as the river's frozen flow, "your hunger ends here. Greywatch bows to no conqueror." Vargan laughed, a guttural rumble that echoed off the cliffs, his yellow eyes fixed on Cale with the glee of a predator scenting downfall. At 50, he was a forge of muscle and malice, his pelt scarred from raids that left villages in ash. "The fallen lectures the victor? Your Omega's parlor tricks won't save you. Join me, or die, and let this one warm my furs as spoils." His warriors shifted, claws scraping ice, the air thickening with the musk of aggression and the metallic promise of blood. Elowyn's heart hammered, the pendant flaring hot as visions assaulted her anew, paths diverging like river forks, one of war, where Cale's blade met thorns in crimson sprays, Vargan's forces overwhelming in a tide of slaughter, another of forgiveness, her light weaving through the fray to reveal truths that could shatter alliances built on lies. The moral crux pressed upon her like the ice's unyielding weight, love or freedom. To bind herself to Cale meant embracing the Pathfinder's burden, guiding him not to vengeance but redemption, forgiving the pack's blindness at the cost of her solitude, or flee, claiming liberty in the wilds, leaving him to the blade's mercy. The wind howled its dilemma, snow blurring the lines of friend and foe as the first enforcer lunged, steel flashing under moonlight. She raised her hand instinctively, the pendant's glow erupting in a cascade of silver threads that snaked across the ice, illuminating hidden sigils etched beneath the frost, ancient wards of the Luna's covenant. The light pierced the combatants, forcing Thorn to recoil with a yelp. His form half-shifted in pain, while Vargan's vanguard hesitated, eyes widening at the ethereal barrier. Cale seized the moment, grappling Thorn to the ground in a clash of fists and fangs, blood blooming dark against the white expanse. "Enough!" Elowyn cried, her voice cutting through the melee like a blade of pure intent. "See the truth. The rivals pact with your elder, seals in blood under the last eclipse. War serves only their thrones, not the pack's soul." The revelation rippled outward, warriors faltering as doubt seeded in their minds, the light unveiling forged documents clutched in Thorn's paw, proof of his collusion with Vargan to unseat Cale and divide Greywatch's lands. Murmurs swelled, loyalties fracturing like the ice groaning beneath them. Thorn snarled, lunging for her throat, but Cale intercepted, pinning him with a roar born of long-buried fury. Vargan wheeled his mount, barking retreat as his forces wavered, the moral choice hanging in the balance: pursue the fight or heed the light that exposed their chains. Elowyn knelt beside Cale, her hand on his bloodied arm, the pendant's warmth a bridge between them. In that visceral chaos, blood steaming on snow, howls fading into the gale, she chose not war's freedom, but love's forgiveness, a path where compassion crowned the guilty and the rejected alike. Yet as Thorn's eyes met hers in defeated rage, the dilemma lingered, spiritual and sharp. Could mercy heal a pack so deeply scarred, or would it demand a sacrifice greater than exile? The moon watched, silent arbiter, as the river's ice cracked faintly beneath the weight of truths unveiled, promising either union or unending fracture. The ice groaned beneath the frozen river, like the earth's own lament, cracks spiderwebbing outward from the heart of the fray, mirroring the fractures in the pack's ancient bonds. Eloin's knees met the snow-dusted surface, the cold piercing her like thorns of forgotten winters. But she held Cale's gaze through the veil of falling flakes, her hand steady on his arm, where blood welled warm and insistent. The pendant at her throat thrummed with a rhythm that echoed her pulse, its silver light fading to a soft ember, spent from unveiling the truths that now hung in the air like smoke from a dying fire. Thorn lay pinned under Cale's unyielding weight, his silver fur matted with crimson, fangs bared in a snarl that dissolved into ragged breaths. Vargan's forces milled at the river's edge, their howls fracturing into uncertain whines as the rival Alpha wheeled away into the eastern mist, his armored form swallowed by the blizzard's white fury. The warriors, Thorn's enforcers, and the pack's loyal remnants halted, weapons lowered, eyes darting between the light's revelations and the king who had risen not in vengeance, but in sorrowful command. Elauin's breath clouded the night, tasting of pine and iron, the wind's howl a distant chorus to the pounding in her chest. The visions had led her here, to this precipice where moral paths converged. Power's throne, built on the bones of the betrayed, or compassion's fragile crown, woven from forgiveness that demanded her own sacrifice. She had chosen love, not the immediate blaze of instinct, but the slow burn of redemption, accepting the bond with Cale that transcended rank's cold chains. Yet acceptance came laced with ache, the weight of her Omega heart, long schooled in rejection's solitude, now tethered to a king's guilt-ridden soul. What was rebirth, if not the shedding of old skins, leaving scars that bloomed into strength? Her fingers tightened on his arm, feeling the heat of him through the chill, a visceral anchor amid the chaos. The pack watched, their forms silhouetted against torchlight that flickered like hesitant stars, breaths sinking in the suspended silence. Cale released Thorn with deliberate slowness, rising to his full height, his raven-streaked hair whipping in the gale. Blood traced rivulets down his side, staining the snow in deep red blooms, but his eyes, those storm-deep blues, held no triumph. Only the melancholy of a sovereign who had glimpsed the cost of his ethical mercy. "Enough blood for one moon's betrayal," he intoned, voice carrying like thunder muffled by clouds, resonant with the duty that had both forged and felled him. He turned to the warriors, his presence a quiet force that stilled the wind's dirge. "Thorn sought to twist my choices into chains, allying with Vargan to carve Greywatch for his greed. But I spared the borders not from weakness, but from the goddess's own law, life over conquest, unity over the blade's lie." His gaze sought Eloin's, a flicker of tenderness breaking through the guilt that shadowed his features, the bond between them now a visible thread, pulsing with the pendant's faint glow. Thorn struggled to his knees, coughing blood onto the ice, his glacial eyes flickering with the dying embers of ambition. "Mercy, it will doom us all," he rasped, the words of final defiance laced with the despair of one whose power had been his only faith. The elder's form shuddered, half shifted back to man, vulnerability etching lines deeper than any scar. Elauin rose, stepping forward despite the tremor in her limbs, the cold numbing her feet but sharpening the resolve born of her revelations. The Pathfinder's gift hummed within her, not as domination, but as a healing light, visions unfolding of paths mended, not severed. She knelt before Thorn, not in submission, but offering, her hand extended palm up, the pendant casting prismatic reflections on his weathered face. "Doom comes from fear's grip, Elder. Release it. Forgive the pack that followed you blindly, as I forgive the rejections that taught me truth." The words tasted of salt and frost, her voice a quiet cadence amid the weavos fading into the peaks. The air thickened, the moon's gaze pressing down like a spiritual weight, illuminating the choice's crux, war's freedom, where she could vanish into the wilds, her gift unclaimed, or union's sacrifice, healing the fractures at the cost of her hidden life. Thorn's hand trembled as he grasped hers, the contact rough and reluctant, but in that touch, something yielded, a sob escaping his throat, raw and unkingly. The light from the pendant flowed gently now, not a barrier but a balm, weaving through the warriors like silver veins, easing wounds both seen and unseen. Gasps rippled through the pack as old guilt surfaced, enforcers dropping to their knees, tears freezing on furred cheeks, loyalists murmuring oaths renewed under the Luna's witness. Vargan's distant howls retreated fully, the rivals' forces scattering like shadows before dawn, the revelation's truth a shield stronger than steel. Kale drew Eloan to her feet, his arm encircling her waist with a possessiveness born of acceptance, not command, the first unresisted embrace, his warmth seeping through her cloak like fire against eternal winter. "You have guided us from the abyss," he whispered, breath warm on her temple, the scent of blood and pine mingling with the deeper musk of their bond. Guilt still lingered in his eyes, but it softened, transmuted by her choice into a shared rebirth. The pack gathered closer, hierarchies dissolving in the snow's blanket, warriors and elders alike bowing not to rank, but to the moral light that had defied it. Eloan leaned into him, the pendant cooling to a steady warmth, symbol of her transformation, from rejected Omega to Pathfinder Queen, her quiet discipline now the realm's beating heart. Yet the healing was no easy crown. It demanded her voice in councils once silent to her, her gift laid bare to a pack that might yet fear its power. Rebirth came through sacrifice, the solitude of exile traded for the vulnerability of union, compassion's path aflame that could warm or consume. As the blizzard eased to a gentle flurry, veiling the river in pristine white, the first hints of dawn bled gold across the peaks, the moon yielding to the sun's reluctant rise. Thorn stood shakily, supported by former foes, his eyes meeting Kyle's in a nod of fractured allegiance. The pack's weavos rose anew, not in hunt, but harmony, a chorus under the fading lunar gaze, affirming the redemption forged in blood and choice. Eloan felt the weight lift fractionally, her heart sinking with Kyle's steady beat, love's proof not in reward, but in the ethical fire they would tend together. The citadel awaited, its spires piercing the horizon like reborn oaths, but the true Renacimento pulsed here, on the ice, a love that healed the guilty, crowned the fallen, and whispered of destinies rewritten under the goddess's watchful eye. If your heart beat alongside ours, like, comment, and subscribe, because every soul that joins our moon keeps the flame of redemption alive. The dawn's first gold bled across the frozen river like veins of molten mercy, thawing the night's iron grip and illuminating the pack's huddled forms in hues of reluctant hope. Eloan stood entwined with Kale, his arm a steadfast anchor around her waist, the heat of his body a quiet defiance against the lingering chill that clawed at her skin. The pendant rested cool now against her chest, its silver crescent no longer flaring with prophetic fire, but humming with a subdued serenity, as if the Luna goddess had expended her fury and turned instead to weaving. Blood from the fray stained the ice in fading crimson petals, steaming faintly in the warming air, while the wind, once a savage dirge, softened to whispers through the pines, carrying the scent of damp earth and renewed life beneath the snow. Thorn knelt before them, his once imposing frame shrunken by the weight of unveiled sins, silver fur receding to reveal the frail lines of an elder stripped of pretense. His glacial eyes, dimmed by the light's inexorable truth, lifted to Kale's, not in challenge, but in the raw vulnerability of one who had bartered his soul for shadows. The pack encircled them, warriors and elders alike forming a ragged semicircle on the river's bank, their breaths sinking in the hush, pelts dusted white and eyes reflecting the moral precipice they had all skirted. Weavos rose sporadically from the tree line, not triumphant but tentative, as if the wilds tested the fragility of this newfound accord. Elauen's heart ached with the texture of it all, the metallic tang of blood on her tongue, the faint tremor in Cale's frame where wounds wept anew, the profound ache of choice that had reshaped her from exile's ghost to this living bridge. She had chosen union over solitude, forgiveness over the wild's indifferent embrace, but the sacrifice carved deep. Her quiet discipline, once a private sanctuary, now demanded she stand exposed, her pathfinder's gift a beacon for a pack that might yet recoil from its glare. What was strength, if not bearing the soul to heal the fractures it had long concealed? Cale's hand tightened on her hip, his touch a silent vow, the melancholy in his deep blue eyes yielding to a tenderness forged in shared revelation. At 48, he had borne the crown's guilt like a shroud, ethical choices that spared lives but invited betrayal. Now, in her light, that burden lightened, transmuted into purpose. "The paths you revealed lead not to thrones of bone," he murmured, his voice a low rumble that stirred the air like embers catching, "but to hearths rebuilt from ash. Will you walk them with me, Elowen, not as subject, but as equal in this redemption?" The question hung between them, intimate as the dawn's glow on his scarred features, pulling at the threads of her resistance, long since unraveled. She nodded, the motion simple yet seismic, her hazel eyes locking with his in a gaze that transcended the pack's watchful circle. The bond, once instinctive and denied, now bloomed visceral and accepted, a love that proved through trial, redeeming the rejected and the fallen alike. Empathy had evolved into something unbreakable, her hand rising to trace the line of his jaw, feeling the stubble rough as frost-kissed bark, the pulse beneath steady and true. In that touch she felt the Renacimento stir, her spirit, scarred by rejections that had honed her into quiet steel, merging with his guilt-shadowed resolve to forge a new era for Greywatch. Thorn rose unsteadily, supported by a young warrior whose eyes still gleamed with the knight's doubts, and bowed his head, not in defeat, but contrition. "The council's greed blinded us," he rasped, voice cracking like thawing ice, the words tasting of blood and regret. "Your mercy, King, and yours, Pathfinder, exposes what we buried. I yield the shadows." The elder's submission rippled outward, warriors sheathing blades with metallic sighs, elders murmuring lunar invocations that wove through the air like silver smoke. The rival's threat had shattered under the light's truth, Vargan's forces fleeing into the mists, their howls silenced by the dawn's unyielding advance. Yet healing demanded more than surrender. It required the pack's collective unburdening, a spiritual reckoning under the moon's fading vigil. Elauen stepped forward, the pendant warming faintly as if echoing her intent, and raised her hands, palms open, inviting the circle closer. The light emanated softly now, not a barrier, but a gentle radiance that bathed the assembly, easing the chill from limbs and the venom from hearts. Visions flickered at the edges of her sight, not omens of war, but glimpses of unity, councils where Omegas voiced truths unheeded before, borders guarded by pacts of compassion rather than conquest, the citadel's spires aglow with fires of renewal. One by one, the pack approached, a scarred enforcer kneeling to offer fealty, tears carving paths through frost on his cheeks, an elder pressing a talisman into her palm, its runes aligning with the pendant's crescent. The air filled with the earthy musk of shifting forms, bodies warming as guilts dissolved, the river's cracks sealing under the sun's tentative kiss. Cale drew her back to his side, his free hand clasping hers, fingers interlacing with a possessiveness that spoke of destiny claimed. The sacrifice was mutual, his throne no longer solitary, burdened by duty's isolation, but shared in the vulnerability of love that defied rank. Blood from his wounds mingled with snowmelt trickling from the banks, a symbolic washing, the red fading to pink rivulets that fed the earth below. "This is our rebirth," he whispered, lips brushing her temple, the scent of pine and iron clinging to him like an oath. "From rejection's frost to the fire of what we choose." Elawan's chest tightened with the profundity of it, tears blurring the golden light, her quiet fire now the realm's guiding flame. Faith had triumphed over despair, destiny bent to liberty's moral arc, their union a testament that love redeemed not through reward, but through the raw proof of hearts aligned. As the pack formed ranks for the return to the citadel, torches reignited along the path, their flames dancing like liberated spirits. The procession wound upward through the passes. The moon yielded fully to the sun, casting long shadows that no longer clawed but stretched in harmony, the pines straightening as if relieved of winter's curse. Elawan walked at Kale's side, their steps synced, the pendant a steady pulse against her heart, a symbol eternal, binding Omega and King in the tragedy's redemptive close. Greywatch awaited, not as a bastion of rigid hierarchy, but a realm reborn through compassion's quiet power, where every soul, fallen or forgotten, could kneel in truth rather than fear. In the distance, the citadel's spires pierced the horizon like reborn promises, the air alive with the first birdsong piercing the hush, a spiritual coda to the night's unraveling. Love had not conquered, it had healed, crowning the guilty with mercy's fragile diadem, and in that union, Elawan found her truest renascimento, no longer adrift in exile, but anchored in the ethical fire of a destiny shared. If your heart beat alongside ours, like, comment, and subscribe, because every soul that joins our moon keeps the flame of redemption alive.